Hey guys, good to see. No, I'm a little later than usual today because this is a video I didn't want to make. Because every now and again you should try to do something you don't like, that scares you, that challenges you, and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about myself today. And a lot of you out there are probably like, who the hell is this Thomas? What the hell does he know about being fat? Sure, he's been thin his whole life. He knows nothing about what it feels like or any of that. So, I'm going to take a couple of steps back. It's actually funny that 10-year challenge came out there lately and probably brought a lot of this to the fore, but it was a lot longer than 10 years ago that I was heavy. But just to give an idea of what I used to look like, this is my ghetto solution with little laptop screen. So you can see there, this is the best I can do now using the camera at the phone. I was not a healthy looking gent. Okay, another photo for clarity. That was me, I think it was 2009, so it's actually close enough to 10 years ago. It might have been 2008. But the reality is, I was all my life heavy. That was all I knew when I was younger. I was always heavy in my teenage years. I never did sport. I was never active. It was not really a thing in my family. I'm just going to turn that off because I can't bear looking at it. And I made a lot of changes for myself in my late 20s. So, like, what's it like growing up like that? Like, for me, I was always heavy, as I said. I had a very bad relationship with food. It was probably not a thing that was driven in our house. There wasn't much sport. There was always access to the bad kinds of foods, large portions, eat your dinner, there's somebody starving in Africa, that kind of thing. And that's the first thing you need to realise. Maybe your relationship with food is not good. Maybe it's wrong. Now, I'll try to talk a bit more about myself. I mean, ate too much. There was way too much access to food. Now, I do strongly believe that you have to start to be accountable for yourself. Maybe I didn't know those things when I was younger. Maybe I didn't know what I was doing to myself. And that's fine. But at a certain point I did. And I ignored it, and I kept getting heavier, and I kept eating, because in my head I said I didn't care. The reality is I did. You know, anyone who says that it's vain to care about your appearance, well, do you know what? If you were not vain, you'd probably look like a hobo. You wouldn't wash, you wouldn't shave, you wouldn't wear new clothes. Everyone has a degree of vanity. Everyone wants to look okay when they're walking down the street. I mean, I got bullied all the time when I was in school, so obviously I was not happy with my appearance. I didn't like the idea of I'd walk down the hall and whenever you'd hear someone snigger, you'd always think it would be about you. Never had great self-confidence because of it. That caused me a lot of issues as well. I probably have a negative personality because of that. Never really thought that anything I could do would be right. Always saw the negative side of anything. If I tried to do something, I'd never think of the win I got. I'd always think of what I failed, what I lost at. And it becomes a permeating stance. It's not a good place to be. It's difficult to change, I'm not going to lie, but it's the real thing I found for me is I had to take ownership. I remember a very specific event. I was at a car event up the north in my mid-20s, and I was helping them collect cash on the gate, just a small thing, entry fees. And it was the smallest thing. I remember being at the bottom of this hill and had to run up a very, very small hill just to bring cash up to the other people who were sitting in the car. And I went up and I sat into the back of that car, and the two guys in the front were just sitting having a chat, and I just sat into the back, and I just remember sitting there in that back seat and I was not able to catch my breath, and it just felt like an eternity that I wasn't able to breathe normally. And I felt self-conscious, and I felt really bad in myself at that moment that I'd gone that far that I couldn't really make this little jaunt without feeling overexerting myself. And you know, it just kind of, I never felt happy with my shape up to that point, but it was kind of a bit like the straw that broke the camel's back. And that was one of the moments that forced me to kind of, I need to take care of this. And the first thing I had to admit to myself was like, look, what I'm doing is not right. You know, so That's something, it might sound harsh, but I do believe strongly in self-ownership. This idea of nobody is wrong and such, I don't necessarily agree with that. If something is not right in your situation, part of it is your fault. Maybe it's just being there. Okay, that, it might sound negative, but that's worked for me. I effectively called myself fat. I was not happy with that, and I made movement to change it. There's nothing wrong with admitting to yourself that you're unhappy. You have to try to make the change and move forward. And it was the littlest steps at first. You know, dropping the Coke for Diet Coke, try not to eat all the ice cream. There's so many little tips that I've used over the years on and off, but the most important thing was I had to realise to myself that I was not happy where I was and I needed to change. Now, I had the ignorance and stubbornness to kind of do that by myself. But if you don't have that, there's nothing wrong with reaching out to someone. So I'm getting a bit off the point. So I was fat all my life. I didn't do any sport. So what I started to do then in my mid to late 20s, as I said, I wasn't very happy with myself. I started to change my diet, and it was little by little. And the weight started to come off, and it was not easy. I was always struggling with my food, struggling to understand. And sometimes what I did is I was working with a guy at the time, and I decided whatever he's eating to stay that shape is probably not going to be far off what I need to eat. And the reality is I was eating probably double what I should have been. And you can see it in the pictures. I obviously was. And that's the key. If you are not happy with the shape you're in, you're eating too much. You're eating too much for you. It doesn't matter what you think the person next to you is eating and somehow is able to stay thin, and it's a metabolism issue and all that. Fair enough. There can be variance, but everyone's body is a little different. If you were heavy, you were eating too much for your shape. And that is the reality I had to face. And I still find that difficult. And I do fall off the wagon because, quite frankly, I have a very bad relationship with food. And I grew up in a bad environment for food. And you know, people showed me things to do when I was younger, and they might have thought that was the way you should eat. It wasn't through any malice that it was wrong. It wasn't that they were trying to steer me wrong, but I gave the analogy there last week to somebody. Is that, imagine 20 years ago when your aunt, your uncle, or your mother was teaching you how to drive, and they told you to do things a certain way, and then you went out on the road after 5 years and you were like, what were they on when they told me that? Don't look behind you, only concentrate on what's in front of you. They were doing the best with the knowledge they had at the time. They weren't trying to steer you wrong, but you do need to accept that if you're using certain information that is not getting you what you want, that information might be wrong and you need to change it. So my own personal life, as I said, I changed my diet, I changed my lifestyle, I started training. The most important thing though was the food. I can't say it enough. I had to change my relationship with the food. I had to change how many sweet things I was eating. I had to change the kind of breakfast I was eating. I had to change the kind of lunch I was eating. I had to change the kind of dinner I was eating. Because to be honest, it was all wrong. I had to learn and reset myself again. And it was difficult. I started training by myself. I learned everything from books because I was so ashamed of my body. I did not want to be seen in public. I did not want to be seen in a gym. I did not want to see people to see me trying things and failing. The one good thing I will say is I have a very systematic engineered head, I guess. So everything I did, I progressed it. I took records. I took notes. I tried to make things a little harder all the time, because that's the other thing. Your body adapts to challenge. If you're doing the same thing all the time, at some point it's going to stop being effective. You need to constantly keep progressing it forward. And then I started getting into sport. And the main reason I got into sport at the time was I didn't want to get too bored in the gym by myself at home in the garage. And I wanted to be in an environment where I felt like I was going to be made accountable. So I took up judo, and I took up fencing, and I took up boxing. And the great thing about going to places like this is you don't turn up for judo training, you're going to get asked why you didn't. You don't turn up for boxing training, you're going to ask where you were. And you don't turn up for fencing training, you're going to get asked where you were. And that camaraderie helped me a lot. And it's the same reason why I'm always trying to tell people you need to train with someone. Someone needs to keep you accountable. And you know what? If you really don't have anyone, make an Instagram profile, get a load of followers and tell them, I'm going to be up every day doing this. This is what I'm doing here. I find it very difficult to do public speaking. It makes me very uncomfortable. But I do it every week and I force myself to do it. So as I got more and more into the sports, I lost weight. And I mean, I know for a fact I was definitely around 105 to 110 kilos when I started. The reality is when you are quite heavy, you usually don't weigh yourself because you're ashamed of it. I did get all the way down to the 70s. I can't remember exactly. And I had gotten heavily into fencing, one of the sports I got into, and I took it very, very seriously. So much so that we closed up a company I had I think it was 2009 or 2010, IT company. And then I moved to Germany. I moved to Germany to fence full time. And I stayed there for 3.5 years. The first couple of months I was in a place in Duisburg, which it didn't really suit me. There wasn't enough training for me, to be perfectly honest. And then I moved to a club called Bayer Leverkusen in Leverkusen, which is in between Cologne and Dusseldorf. And there was a time there where I was training 6 to 8 hours a day. So, you know, I went from one side of the scale to the complete polar opposite. I was usually between 71 and 73 kilos. I would be weight training 4 or 5 times a week. I would be rowing, I would be running, I would be fencing. Fencing sessions was usually 3 or 4 hours. And this went on for a time. And of course, I was trying to train myself, and that was another mistake. It was and it wasn't. I do believe willpower is kind of a finite resource. At some point you will start to run out of it. And that's why you sometimes need someone to stand beside you and say, look, that's okay. You just need to take a step back, get back on the horse. You need to have a couple of easy trainings. If your only coach is yourself and you have a negative mindset and the only indicator of progress is winning and you're losing, it's very, very, very difficult to keep moving forward, which is why I think it's good to be in a positive environment that brings you along and tries to encourage you. But at the same time, you do need people to give you a kick if you're not making progress and it's your own fault, which is something I must admit in the gym I find difficult. When I see someone struggling but they don't seem to want to make a change, it's not something I'm good at giving them that kick, which, you know, aggressive, which is sometimes you need the stick. That's the reality. Some people don't like that. You run the risk of throwing them out if you do that, and maybe that's something we need to do more often. So for me anyways, I was fencing for 3.5 years over in Germany, and I was actually considering moving to Hungary to become a fencing master, but the reality is that kind of job would be very difficult to have a family with. So, and also it would be nearly impossible to have it in Ireland. There's, as most people know, there's not much fencing in Ireland. We're not the world capital with that. So I elected to come home and try to open a gym with a friend of mine, Thomas Janacek, one of the most intelligent, well-learned individuals I've ever met as regards to physical training and physical therapy and the like. And that's kind of been our journey for the last couple of years. But that is my background, is that I was always heavy and I do struggle with my weight constantly. So when I'm telling people about you need to be accountable and you need to watch this, you need to watch that, I'm not just reading this out of a book. I'm not this guy who was young and athletic and did all the sports in school and never had a trouble with weight. I'm entirely the opposite. Over the last year, I definitely gained about 10 kilos. We had a rough patch there last June, July, and I took that as an excuse to go crazy, and I ate like crap. And the amount of crap that I am able to eat and justify to myself, I still don't understand how I can do it. And that's the real problem we have, is self-justification. You need to try and make yourself accountable. That's what I find. That's what it is for me. But the big thing is that if you ever feel like no one understands you, like you don't You have this compulsion to eat everything that's in front of you. If there's something in the press, if there's that chocolate bar sitting in the corner, if there's a tub of ice cream in the freezer and you feel you have to finish it, it's like, I do understand that. I do struggle with that all the time. And you just need to try to understand where you're going. That's what works for me. Am I going to pretend that after these 10 years of change that I'm fixed, for lack of a better word, and I have no problems? Of course not. I still have problems. I still have problems all the time. And it's just a case of, I guess, I've reset the marker. I got up to near 90 kilos there before Christmas, and that was the big warning shot for me. I couldn't let it go further than that. I had to pull myself back under control. Knowing I've done it before is a big help, but it is something that I always need to keep on top of. That doesn't mean that, it's the end and woe is me and it's not worth the point. Of course there's a point to it. There's always a point to trying to be in a good physical shape. That it's one less thing to worry about. I'm always unhappy with my figure when I'm not where I think I should be. I'm always insecure. I'm always thinking about, are people looking at me? How do I look in this? Are people laughing at me when I hear them sniggering? Like, I grew up with that, so I can't get rid of it. But when I am in good shape, it's one less thing I have to worry about. It makes life easier. It makes life easier knowing that I don't have to worry about having a lot of health problems down the road. I don't have to worry about, say, getting diabetes. I don't have to worry about, if I have kids, my kids looking at me as a role model and thinking, is this what I'm getting them ready for? Because, do remember that the path you walk is the path that other people are following. And that might sound harsh, but it's a big thing. So just, guys, if anyone ever wants to talk, if anyone ever wants a message, if you ever feel like you have some cravings or you don't understand where you are or anything like this, don't ever be afraid to send me a message. I'm here, I'm real. I'm not just trying to preach random stuff at you. I'm genuinely, a lot of the time when I'm talking about food struggles, I'm talking about myself. That's just trying to be authentic, I guess. But look, I know that was a bit waffling and meandering. I knew it was going to be. I didn't find it particularly easy, and I still don't really know how to finish, so I'm just going to stop there. Best of luck, guys. Look forward to talking to you again soon. We'll be back with something maybe a little more productive next week.